Hello. Hello. Welcome to day 2 of our WBC 2020 annual summit. Today, we will explore actions each of us can take to weave a moment for women in business. I am Lee Wasson, a WBC founding board member. And like each of you, I am an everyday activist for equal position, pay, and power for all business women. And also like you, I am passionate about the power of collaboration to accomplish bold and worthwhile goals. And nothing is more important than driving meaningful and measurable positive change in the 9 action initiatives adopted by WBC, our incredible partner organizations, and our dedicated advisory and leadership council members. As a woman and a trailblazer who has spent 33 years taking risks in my career in the financial services business, sometimes winning and sometimes failing, it is with deep respect and appreciation for what these next change agents and leaders are contributing to our movement that I introduce Dr. Rohini Anand, Senior Advisor to the UN and Catalyst, and Zeilstra, CEO of Gender Fair, to moderate our opening panel segment focused on corporate drivers of real change.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you to all the panelists here joining us for an important conversation on corporate drivers for real change. I would like the panelists to each introduce themselves along with an icebreaker. But instead of breaking ice, please answer the question on how you would break one thing to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization. And that could include a mindset, a process, a system, or any of the above. So let's start with Kerri at Capital One.
Thanks. The honor of going first. So my name is Kerri Palmer. I'm a Senior Vice President of Risk Management at Capital One, where I've worked for the past 19 years. For the icebreaker question, I think I'll answer it really less about my corporation and more generally. And that is, I would break the pace of change of people's thoughts and beliefs about the importance of DEI. You know, I think that as people age, they get more set in their ways and it's harder to change their minds. So I believe that meaningful change is going to require leadership from younger generations. And generally, I'm really optimistic at that prospect. But every once in a while, something happens that makes me come face to face with the reality that this type of change takes a lot of time. And so my little story is that my daughter goes to a wonderful and progressive private school here in the Washington, D.C. area. When she was in 6th grade, she joined the robotics team. It had 6 boys and 6 girls, complete gender diversity. One day she came home visibly shaken and upset, and when I asked her what was wrong, she told me that in preparation for the upcoming robotics tournament, the boys had declared that they were going to do all the programming because the scoring was made up of 2 components, the actual programming of the robots to do stuff and the presentation, which included poster boards and such. And because everybody knows that boys are better at robots and girls are better at posters, their roles have been determined. Now my little change agent wasn't going to set for that, but it really actually led me to be convinced that getting to diversity is hard, but they were diverse. Getting to inclusiveness is just way harder. And to see a group of 12-year-olds already programmed that way highlighted the challenge that we have in front of us.
Well, thank you. How about yourself, Gerri?
Yeah, so for me, I would change the mindset that each dimension of diversity has to be dealt with independently. And so I think about intersectionality. And one quick story that comes to mind is as we started addressing issues around Black Lives Matter this summer and the unrest, And the fact that our Pride EBRG stepped up. This was at the same moment that we were to celebrate Pride Month in June. And they said, you know, this is inappropriate. We need to step back and support our African-American colleagues and, you know, minimize our celebration today. We're still going to celebrate, but let's understand and show up for one another. And so oftentimes in organizations, there's this mindset that we can only focus on gender balance right now, or we can only focus on LGBTQ plus issues. But the overlap, the intersectionality is where I would break the chains right away.
Great.
And working on it, in fact.
Great. Thank you, Gerri. Balaji, how about you? Please introduce yourself and let us know what you would break to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm Balaji Ganapathy. I'm the Chief Social Responsibility Officer for Tata Consultancy Services, also known as TCS. We are a global top 3 information technology company with operations in 50 countries, about 450,000 employees working for us, and about $22 billion in revenue. I mentioned that because the key dimensions that we're very proud of is we have over 165,000 women in our workforce. We are, in fact, one of the largest employers of women in the technology sector globally. And we have people from over 150 nationalities. So it is a melting pot within TCS. And our mission is to be purpose-driven, adaptable, and resilient, especially given the advent of the COVID crisis. And I'll talk about what that does to impact society and people in a major way. Gerri and I didn't talk beforehand on this, but in fact, I had the exact same point to share, that we often look at this problem from one dimension and then try to address it. And in fact, we did a whole series about it a couple of years ago on the need to have an intersectional view. We don't live in isolation. We don't live our work life separately, our home life separately. We don't, separate our responsibilities as parents and caregivers from our responsibilities as professionals and business people and entrepreneurs. So we live in a multi-dimensional world, and intersectionality doesn't have to be a buzzword. That is the reality. It is certainly manifesting itself more now than ever before, because we are getting more nuanced in our understanding. And the last point I want to make is that I'm also a very proud member of the WBC board of directors. And when this movement came together last year, ED and I have worked together in the past on several efforts to advance women, equity, and access in STEM education. And this was a remarkable movement that really ignited a spark among people from different dimensions. And that is the analogy I want to draw, that each of the 9 initiatives that are outlined by WBC, the diversity of the partners and the kind of issues that they are dealing with, and the kind of leaders who are at the table, bring in that multidimensional nature, which is what is creating this movement as faster together. We are driving ahead with collaboration, and we are driving ahead with action.
Great, thank you so much. Now I'll turn it over to Meena Krishnan, the CEO of Inoventures.
Thank you so much. I'm Meena Krishnan, President and CEO of Inoventures and Symetrica. We are proud to be involved in public health analytics using information technology, and proud to provide support on infectious diseases prevention, such as Ebola, HIV, and right now getting into COVID-19. It's an interesting question. What do we want to break to accomplish the DEI initiative? I would like to say that we should break the barriers that exist. And as the fellow speakers just shared, there are still barriers, and the journey is going to continue on for a while. But I would like to break the barriers as business leaders by providing and opening the gates for our teams to be able to recruit and engage diverse employees. So we have an equal participation in our employee force that provide a good balanced solutions. So to that extent, I'm very proud to say that in my small business, we are more than 85% representing diverse backgrounds, including women in technology. And I've taken it upon myself to keep it as a mission in my companies that we never forget this vision, because if you fail to do that, we're going to fail to include talents that are available everywhere. So I am just happy about that.
Great, thank you, Meena. And lastly, Astha at Zendesk, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Johanna. I'm Astha Malik, and I'm the Vice President of Go-to-Market Strategy at Zendesk. And we are a service-first CRM company, and with over 160,000 customers, I'm sure you've interacted with our solution in some form. So really excited to be here today. And when it comes to breaking something, first of all, I love breaking things, but when it comes to DEI specifically, I would love to break the string of announcements and events we've seen over the last so many years where we celebrate people from minority groups or women of color as being the first in doing something, right? So as being the first CEO, as being the first CFO, or accomplishing something for the very first time. And don't get me wrong, I really want to celebrate the accomplishments here, but I think it would be great to see the separation between the celebration of accomplishment and, by creating so much opportunity, so much abundant opportunity for everyone, that it's not a first. And I say that also because I have a 12-year-old, and, sometimes he's sitting next to me as I'm scanning through LinkedIn and Twitter and so many events, and, all these announcements come through, and he's quizzed me about that. He's like, really, is this really the first time a woman has done this? And is this really the first time a person of color has accomplished this? And I'd love for us to break that string, if you will, and, be at a place where it's not an anomaly, it's not an exception, but it's something that is just a celebration of one's achievement, irrespective of who they are and their background. So again, I think we are all saying something very common, and I'm hoping that, we've seen some advancements here, but we continue to work and, push towards that goal.
Great answers. Rohini?
Sure, wonderful. You can tell that this is going to be an incredible panel from the introductions. I think each one had a unique story to share, but there were certainly very common themes. And these are corporations that are stepping up and really leading the change. And each one of the panelists is an individual at the forefront of that change. And I was reminded of the quote that Edie mentioned yesterday, Margaret Mead's quote. And Edie, that's my absolute favorite quote, if I can remember it correctly. She said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And I think that's where this starts. It's corporate drivers and individuals who are committed to making that change. So really looking forward to engaging with each of you, because I know that you exemplify that quote. And I would just say that we're living in very unprecedented times. We have these 4 tsunamis going on at the same time that are having a disproportionately adverse impact on women and people of color. We have the health crisis with COVID-19 ushering in a period of agility and disruption. We have the social justice crisis with Black Lives Matter. And along with that, it's ushering a period of hope and consequently expectations by employees and by consumers. We have the economic crisis with unemployment, and the McKinsey Lean-In report that many cited yesterday is really painting a very bleak picture for women, and particularly for women of color, as many are impacted and are opting out of the workforce. And the 4th tsunami is the climate crisis with absolute devastation on the environment. So if we are to positively impact our legacy to future generations, and I think Kerri and Astha spoke to that, corporations must step up. And in order to do that, corporations have to look inside and outside and look at the entire ecosystem. Look at the customers, the clients, the employees, the supply chain, the community, and really take a stand. I don't think that any corporation can be on the sidelines anymore. So with that, I want to ask you the first question, Balaji, and I think you introduced your organization pretty well, but TCS really has this ethos of corporate responsibility and philanthropy. And you had talked about the confluence, when you talked earlier, you talked about the confluence of health, social justice, and the economy. So if you can share what you're doing to recognize that interplay and to drive solutions through public-private partnerships and collaboration. I think you're about to launch, white papers. So if you can just talk a bit about, the initiative and something that you're proudest of, and perhaps if, how it's having an impact on the business. Go ahead.
Certainly. Thank you, Rohini. And absolutely, I think it is a confluence of crises. And when we spoke, I was talking about the health crisis, the economic crisis, and the social justice crisis coming to a head at the same time. And to qualify that a little bit on the healthcare side, it is not an equal problem for all, right? While it is affecting people from all walks of life, those who are vulnerable and those who are marginalized are the ones who are impacted more than others. And the immediate impact of that on the economic side is that the downturn and the business impact is also a huge disparate impact on women of color, minorities, people who are in sectors like retail and hospitality and travel that has predominantly had a better gender representation than some of the other sectors, right? And in the social justice crisis also, all of this has a common thread, right? The social justice crisis is also so important because the impact of the healthcare and the economic crisis is going to set us back even more and exacerbate the differences that were there. And that is why it is important to have a multi-pronged and a holistic approach to what we do as an organization. So from a TCS perspective, I want to just touch upon 3 areas that are important from our perspective. First of all, health and well-being of employees. Employees, I think as a large employer with almost 500,000 people working for us, this crisis has hit us badly because of the extended families and the networks and the markets that we operate in. And first and foremost, from Jan to March, our primary focus was to ensure health and well-being of employees. And to create a solution around that, we put together what we call the secure borderless workspaces. And we were able to move 95% of our employee base. This has never been done before, in a 3 to 4 week period to a remote working model without having any impact on client deliverables, on their own health and safety, as well as security and data privacy, which as a technology company is a huge responsibility for us. And we continue to work in that space to, as the crisis unfolds in different parts of the world, having additional support systems created, mental health resources provided, as well as access to healthcare, including setting up isolation centers and hospitals and providing employees access to those, especially in countries where the healthcare system is very weak. The second aspect is the customers aspect. I think it is important to recognize that unless we rebound as a country, as a society, from an economic perspective, we cannot put the crisis behind us. And there is great opportunity. The first and foremost thing to do there was to make sure that all of the critical infrastructure that was being supported by TCS across all domains, whether it is government or pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, or banks and financial institutions, manufacturing companies, they needed to keep their infrastructure, their business alive. And so we worked very closely with them to make sure that the supply chains were on. We were able to ramp up our facilities and provide them that are covered during that time, at a time when many of their own employees and many of their own setups could not handle the challenges that were coming up. And that continues to happen today. And the same secure borderless workspaces that I mentioned for our employees, now we have extended to our customers, and many of them are now benefiting from that by moving and transforming into that space. And there it is important to also highlight that coming out of the crisis means we have to create innovative solutions for many of these organizations. And with the pandemic still not behind us, digital solutions play a key role there. So we continue to work on that. The third area that I wanted to talk about and highlight is the societal aspect. And there is a huge need that existed in society even before COVID-19. And in fact, it is said that in 25 weeks, we are back by 25 years in terms of progress as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals or many of the key societal issues that plague our society. And so it is important to recognize that healthcare and access to healthcare well-being is important right now, followed by food security, followed by education and the digital divide. I'm saying that because those are existing systems that are getting disrupted. But it is important to also not take your eye off the earlier investments that were made in so many different areas that also need the support, right? And we cannot renege on that, even with the challenges that are being faced. We have to double down on that, and that's what we were able to do as a group. As the Tata Group, we came together and we pledged $200 million to support the community in this time of need. And TCS is a huge part of that investment. But additionally, we opened up all of our research and development and innovation capabilities to work to create cures, especially in the drug molecule discovery space, in creating technology-led solutions that could improve access for people, safe access for people, and many such initiatives in that space. Education is another focus areas that we had, and we made sure that teachers and educators who were facing this challenge at this time, because if educators are able to take care of our children, then the care economy will get a shoulder to lean on. Mm-hmm. And if the care economy doesn't get that, the impact is going to be gender disparate. So all of these are interconnected, and the impact on society, especially, I worry a lot, but I'm very optimistic also, because there is a renewed focus on some of the most important things that people needed to focus on. It is moving from just greenwashing or making pledges and commitments to actual action. The funding and the resources are needed, but also the institutional knowledge of what you have to offer as a company, what you are good at, that needs to be brought to the fore to create the societal, to solve the societal issues that we face today.
Wonderful. I think that's great. And I think you really spoke to sort of TCS taking a holistic approach. You know, there's lots of companies that make commitments with a big bang about multi-million dollars, but it's really the follow through in a thoughtful way to have a positive impact. So thank you. I think this is, as I started by saying, you know, it's very much philanthropy and corporate responsibility is at the ethos of TCS, and you really demonstrated that. So thank you. Josie, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next question.
Okay. Shifting focus a little bit back to diversity, and you know, certainly a lot of effort is focused on diversity, and even in the most recent report of Lean In and McKinsey, you know, looking at representation of women at each of the levels of management, especially, you know, getting to that first rung of the ladder. But there's not as much discussion or focus, I guess, on inclusion efforts. And I read recently that, you know, 95% of employees at Capital One say it's a great place to work, which is a really, really high percentage. So my question to you, Kerri, is what is it about your culture that gives it such a high rating? And how do you sustain that inclusive culture or sense of belonging as a senior business executive?
That's a great question. First of all, I'll say, like, we are really proud of how excited our employees are about Capital One. But there are lots of factors that can lead someone to call a company a great place to work. It could be your paycheck, it could be your benefits, it could be the stability, it could be the actual job. But we do think a big piece of that is how comfortable people feel bringing their whole selves to work. It's been said and proven that what gets measured gets done. And, you know, diversity is something that's far easier to measure than inclusion. And we've seen evidence that, like, just how hard, like, even with the ability to measure diversity, This week's McKinsey report shows just how hard it is to make the actual progress. Well, several years ago, we did add an inclusion index to our all associate survey, recognizing that we viewed that as a key driver of our overall associate satisfaction. It's made up of 3 questions. I feel like I belong, I feel valued, and I believe my opinion matters. Now, there's no way to trace what leads an individual employee to answer any one of those questions in a specific way on a specific day. But over time, we can see the trends in how our overall performance moves, adjust our practices accordingly, and then see how movements in that index actually drive our overall associate satisfaction. We do find that that it's important to think about both the corporate policies and programs as well as the actions of individual leaders as we kind of drive into what helps those metrics. So some of the corporate elements are things like the tone at the top. Does our CEO and do other key leaders talk about diversity and inclusion as something that's important? Do we have good corporate infrastructure and programs in place to teach our managers, especially those entry-level managers, to have more inclusive styles? We have, I think like most companies, we have business resource groups to target underrepresented populations. I lead the Empower, which is our women's business resource group, and there are 6 additional ones at Capital One, providing opportunities for our associates to connect and to support each other. Now, individually, as a senior leader, I have the opportunity to influence both my team and the broader organization. And so for me, I think it's showing up as a role model. It's an important starting point for me to create and sustain that inclusive culture. So I think the first thing to do, though, is eliminate the action and behaviors that are kind of ingrained in us that lead people to feel excluded. So before you can feel included, you have to not feel excluded. And so some things that have been really obvious to me in hindsight are, the workday golf events. Well, how many people have found a way to not be able to attend that thing because they don't play golf? And guess who doesn't play golf, right? So there's just some clear things like that. The frequency of after hours events. So, as a working mom who has always struggled with the guilt of how do I actually succeed as a corporate leader as well as a parent, I've struggled to, make it to the frequent happy hours and team dinners and things like that. So just being really sensitive to balance the events that we have that create exclusionary feelings, as well as then putting in place some mechanisms to make people feel more included. I think that for me, as I think about it, an individual, the way things that I do, I've worked really hard to add structure into how I run my organization to actively solicit thoughts from everyone in the room. What I've noticed is in any given meeting, and with the size of the meeting grows, what I've seen is it happens more and more. You have the dominant voices in the room. And those are typically people who are more powerful, more confident leaders. And there are people who actually sink to the back and actually, don't speak as much. So the structure I've tried to put in place is actually more active facilitation and less letting things just organically happen. So physically going around the room and giving each and every individual on the team an opportunity to speak and say what's on their mind, to provide input and to give their thoughts. I've also tried, and haven't perfected yet, but a structured follow-up. I think some people believe their voice doesn't matter and their opinion doesn't matter because they throw things out there, they take a risk and they say something and nothing happens, crickets chirp. And it's one of the hardest things because I think as leaders, we're all busy from early morning to late night. But what I've tried to do is actually personally follow up every time someone takes the time to send me a thing. And so it could be either as simple as hey, great idea, we did the thing you suggested, or thanks for the suggestion, we've looked into it, here's why we can't do it right now, but we'll continue to evaluate. And so I think it's little simple things like that where individuals will feel like they can bring themselves, they can state what's on their mind, they'll be heard, they won't be ridiculed. And then no one feels like they're wasting their time when they're taking a risk or a chance to raise their hand with a senior leader.
Well, thank you, Kerri, and I appreciate that, there's a lot of great learning here for our audience, both at an organizational level as well as a personal leadership level. And I like the focus both exclusionary behaviors as well as inclusive behaviors. So thank you for that. Some great tips. I'll turn it over to Rohini now.
Sure, thanks, Jose. And I'm going to ask the next question of Astha. Astha, I loved your breaking story because I think that corporate drivers of change, the change actually starts at home. So I think that was a perfect story. But my question to you is that California is certainly seeing sort of a confluence of all four crises, including the environment. And we read that for the first time in a decade, there are more Californians leaving than coming into the state. So my question is, what is Zendesk doing to take care of its employees? I think, Kerri, you talked, about how you've created that culture and the small things you can do as well as the larger structural things. So what is Zendesk doing to take care of, employees during these very unprecedented times? And then I have a second question for you once you're done with that.
Okay, so I'll take your first one. I think, again, a lot of companies were forced to acknowledge the fact that all the social events, and I'm speaking broadly, right, specifically to California as well, we've had wildfires here, obviously being hit by pandemics like everybody else, and the other social movements like Black Lives Matter, they all affect the well-being of people, and people are ultimately your employees. And I think there's no hiding anymore. There is no sort of like getting away by not acknowledging that it affects your employees. So luckily for us at Zendesk, I think we've always been a little bit more progressive on that front. But I'll be honest, we've had to learn a few things too, right? We've always taken the well-being of our employees very seriously. We've always been very progressive in our social impact strategy. And some of you know that we are headquartered in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So we've thrived in that community. So our CEO, our leadership team, our social impact team, and actually the general employee population in San Francisco volunteers regularly. We give back to the community because we believe that community has definitely helped us grow and thrive. So with everything else that's happening over the last few months, I think Zendesk had to step up on a variety of different places, and I'm happy to kind of talk through a few of them. One, I think it was clear that with everyone being a remote employee now, people were thinking that there was lack of empathy. They were not being heard. They just felt there was a barrier with a Zoom and not just being able to see people in person. So we introduced this concept of global empathy circles. And the whole idea behind that was not only just to have our employees come together and in a very candid and transparent way share what are they really feeling, what are they going through, but take meaningful action from there. And to Kerri's point before as well, I think that only comes in if there's leadership buy-in. And Zendesk has always believed in that. So our empathy circles were actually led by our executive team, including our CEO. Like we showed up, everyone showed up, we heard people, and for the most part, we listened. And I think that's where we started thinking about what kind of programs, what kind of initiatives we could actually put in place. So I think, again, a lot of people talk about it and everybody put out an Instagram post, but you have to do something to show to your employees that you're going to drive change. So those empathy circles was sort of like, the first step in us listening, understanding, having very deep and emotional conversations with our employees. From there, we introduced a lot of new programs. We actually introduced a new training for DEI education for managers. Again, we have a global team, and many of our managers and leaders manage multicultural teams, and inclusion is super important, but sometimes you just have to tell people what it really means. Let's be honest, it's not that everyone knows about it. So rather educate them, hold the teams accountable, hold your leaders accountable, and we introduced that training. We also understood that there was so much pressure on caregivers, whether that's mothers, whether that's other people taking care of children at home, or their elderly at home, people who have actually seen their families go through COVID. And with that in mind, last quarter, we introduced Flexi Fridays, which basically gave our employees the opportunity to take the time on Fridays to look after themselves and their families. And for Q4, we've introduced another program, which is a caregiver leave, which allows every employee at Zendesk to take 2 weeks off to take care of their loved ones. So again, that is an important thing to do. You have to have meaningful, actionable measures that employees can take advantage of instead of just talking, yes, we understand you, we hear you, we have to put it in action. I'm so happy that we did. And there are little things. I'm a believer in the science of meditation, and little things like even the Calm app being available to all employees for a whole year helps. I use it every day, and I think that brings a little bit of clarity, a little bit of like mindfulness to my crazy day like everybody else's. So I think these measures, along with a lot of other things that we've done in terms of like creating this global ally toolkit. Again, like employees were like, we want to help others, I just don't know how. So we put toolkits together to give them prescriptive guidance on what they can do in order to help others on their teams and beyond. And then last but not least, I think you have to put some policy measures in place, whether that's your recruiting challenges that you have in terms of like making it more inclusive, or it's about just fair and equitable practices around the globe. So we have really stepped up in sort of like articulating that and holding ourselves accountable as a team.
That's awesome. I think, some really, really concrete stuff around, measures taken to support employees during this time and being leader-led, because I think that's absolutely critical. I need to get that app.
Yes, I highly recommend it.
I need that app for sure. Just, before I transition over to you, Zay, because, I know that she wants to ask Meena a question, but just very, very quickly at a very high level, if you could share with us, and the reason I ask this is because, you hire a lot of employees with STEM backgrounds. And one of WBC's action initiatives is around women in STEM. In the Silicon Valley, 11% of executive positions are held by women, and the quit rate for women is twice that as for men. The WBC target is 35% technology leadership positions should be held by women by 2025, and 15% of those women of color. So maybe just one or two key things that you're doing to attract and retain women in STEM, including women of color.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a part of, again, our talent acquisition strategy and the changes that we've made recently, we have expanded our partnership across a lot of organizations. And, I'm going to name a few to tell you how we're trying to source a better pipeline, because, we want to get into the business of excuse removal. Enough of like, there's not talent, or like it's hard to source people of color or women. So let's sort of expand our network and get out of that excuse that, you constantly hear from many recruiters or many organizations. So as a part of that, building our capability, being a little bit more flexible when we are hiring for diversity and like, adding to the culture that we have. We partnered with organizations like, Women Who Code Like a Girl, Black Professionals Network, and also NOD, which is the biggest community for disability inclusion. So there is a lot of work that we're doing, and I'm just naming a few, but we've had partnerships across the globe with so many organizations. And I think the other thing that you were mentioning before is like, the pace of change has been slow, because there's also this misconception, or, something that I have maybe a diverse view around, is that it's great to sort of like, encourage kids from the very beginning to invest in, again, science, mathematics, again, STEM, the things that we talked about. But to Kerri's point as well, when there are sort of like, you see that kind of discrimination and bias, and, if a girl at that age is seeing that, encourage them to step up, encourage them to speak up. Like, and I say that generally speaking, not just for girls, because I have a 12-year-old boy, and, I'm very open and vulnerable in front of him so that he can step up for, Kerri's daughter if he sees that happen in a class. So I think that is important, and let's not underestimate the impact of what it does to the psyche of kids as they're growing up, and like just developing some notions around, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not the right person. So that's one part of it. And second is just expanding our thinking beyond just and hiring engineers. I mean, you talked about the percentage of like women leadership in technology, and I've seen a couple of CEOs and again women as well who've been who are CEOs at SaaS companies without an engineering degree. So I do want to say that, the talent comes in different forms, and, we need to be diverse in our approach and more flexible in accepting and embracing that too.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much. Great, very concrete suggestions. I'm going to turn it over to you, Zay.
Sure. Meena, I understand you strongly support the community. And I'm just curious on how you and Inoventures is doing that, especially during these challenging times.
Thank you. So I would like to begin with an exercise that I went through when I went to Wharton Business School. One of my favorite classes was Professor Adam Grant, who's no stranger to all of us, and he's done some excellent work. So he asked us to summarize our life story in just 6 words. So we looked at each other in disbelief, like, no, he didn't say that. How are we supposed to do that? But end of it all, when we completed that, I would say that it really reflected the purpose behind my life. And to this date, that shortest life story ever is still my favorite sentence. So I came up with life is short, create your legacy as my life story, because when I reflected back, that kind of stood out and it came up to the top. And to explain that and then to link my community impact, I have to talk about an incident that happened in my life. 15 years ago, on my birthday, early in the morning, I received a news that no one wants to hear, that I lost all my people that I grew up with in a car accident. So I lost my mother, my brother, and both his daughters in a car accident. And I was stunned in that moment. And not only that, I was stunned in my career path and in my life. It really was a crazy time. I went through some dark times, and after days, weeks, and months that followed that incident, I had a lot of self-reflection. As a result of that, I decided that change is the only constant, and facing it head on is the only option available to all of us. So I decided to get up and then see what was going for me, and then make use of that to create some resources. So I'm able to leave a legacy for the people who died and then left me early in my life, and also see a purpose in my life. So I went back to Wharton Business School, came back with an advanced management degree on top of my 2 existing master's degrees, and decided to start my company, Inoventures, and later on added Symetrica to create a difference in public health area. And then since then, I'm happy to add that we have created a lot of jobs, adding to the economy, and also beginning to create public health initiatives and analytical programs relating to public health, creating an impact in the economy. But on top of that, I know that my parents always stood for leaving an impact on the community. And if I were to create a legacy, if I were to be true to that 6-word life sentence, the life story that I had come up with, the 6-word sentence, then I needed to do something to impact the community. So our family started a foundation called Save a Child Now. And through that nonprofit foundation, we have started supporting many important initiatives. And I'm very proud to say that one of them is to support financially disadvantaged women in India. In a village in North India, there are young girls who are 8 or 9 years of old, are pushed into marriages, and they're forced into it. And we decided to support an initiative that started an all-girls school. And I'm very proud to say that many of these girls have since then matriculated very successfully, and it's one of the schools that's coming in the top according to Indian government results, and they've moved on to accomplish bigger and better things in life. So the journey continues on. We have many more things to do, but every little thing that we have done is I'm truly proud of. And then through this, I just wanted to reflect that we all have a purpose in our lives, but I think what triggers and what makes sense is to connect our everyday activity to this purpose, so we move towards that goal. And in addition, I think standing together and making an impact and taking care of each other, and also believing in showing, not telling. So what that means is show, don't tell, and that's something that I keep telling myself. We really don't have time, as it was evidenced in my life incident. Our lives are very short on this world. So in order to create an impact, we need to start acting right now. So we all have plans, we all have goals, but according to me, my experience, you just need to start acting on it right away so you don't waste any time. So I'm happy to share any further information that anyone needs on any of this.
Wow, thank you, Meena, for sharing that heartbreaking story, and especially how this incident, was a catalyst for you, both personally and professionally. I know our audience really appreciated hearing from you on that. Rohini?
Sure, Yosei, that was really powerful, Meena. Thank you for sharing and for making yourself vulnerable. And I think, some of the things that you said, lift each other up, show, not tell, act now. You don't have time, do it right away. Really appreciate those messages. So with that, we'd like to shift gear in terms of acting now. And it is my pleasure. Gerri Mason Hall works for Sodexo, and I was a former Senior Vice President, Corporate Responsibility and Chief Diversity Officer at Sodexo. And I couldn't be more delighted than to have Gerri take the reins and do some amazing work in North America. So with that, my question is of Gerri. In the service industry that Sodexo represents has been impacted by all of the tsunamis that we talked about. So what I'd like to ask you, Gerri, is what is Sodexo doing? And it's disproportionately impacted the frontline population, many of whom are women and people of color. So if you could just share a little bit about what Sodexo is doing to care for that population. We can't hear you, Gerri.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that, Rohini. And I just have to say that, we've been recognized for our work in DE&I, and one achieved a lot of accolades and recognition in large part from your leadership. And so we continue to build on that momentum, but we are a service organization. And that's one of the things that the work that we had been doing, engaging and focused on that front line for years before COVID, has served us well. And so in that vein, in this moment, what used to be called by the Department of Labor, the unskilled laborers, the unskilled workers, have now been elevated to heroes. And so that's the focus that we have always had, that this is the lifeline of our business. We don't have a product. It is our people. We are a service industry, a very humble service between food service and facilities management, but we recognize the power. And in the COVID experience, what we saw, those pre-existing conditions in society, the disparate health impacts, all of these things combined had a disparate impact on those frontline workers. And so while everyone says, yes, we're all in this together, but it's affecting all of us differently. And so one of the things I'm really proud of with Sodexo, and this is a first for me, unheard of, we often talk about the war for talent. Well, in this point in time, we had to make some hard business decisions. We had to shut down some of our locations because of the industries. So for example, schools closed. We didn't have the need for a lot of those frontline workers. Universities were closed. So our hospitals, our seniors facilities remained open and in fact expanded during this time. But then we had these employees. So where we could place them within our business, we did. But what we took an unprecedented step was to reach out to our partners and to say, we have this available talent, you have this need, let's work together and keep these people employed. And so that's a risk. That's a risk. Who gives away their treasure? And we shared that talent so that we could stay aligned with our business, so those employees stayed gainfully employed. And as we expand, as we reemerge and rise, they're coming back. And so that's one of the key things, is recognizing that at every level, it's not just about all of the diversity programs, much like Kerri and Astha described, all of those programs, that's again what got us the awards and recognition, but in continuing that sense of belonging and how do we stay inclusive? How do we ensure that each and every one of our employees feel they belong at Sodexo and know that Sodexo cares? And so again, that's one example of how we continue that and that focus. And so then as well as a host of other programs, developing, investing in them. I'm very proud of some of the work we're doing around scholarships for their dependents. So opportunities like that, and I think that we will see that momentum continue after we fully recover from the pandemic. I do think that you'll see that heightened respect for these frontline workers continue across society, and I remain hopeful for that at the least.
Great, thank you. Just a second part to this. I know that, we talked about intersectionality and, WBC has a strong focus on women of color. If you can just maybe mention one or two key things that you're doing at Sodexo to build a pipeline for women of color. Just maybe two highlights.
Yeah, so again, a lot of that recognition was our push around advancing, creating that pipeline and focusing on advancing women, especially in the P&L roles, much like WBC stands for. So in the P&L roles and at the top. And I'm very proud to say that our leadership is 40% women of color now. And so with that, we have an expectation that they pay it forward. So they're very engaged in developing those under them. And we're partnering with external programs. We have one with McKinsey right now for further developing that pipeline, very much targeted on women of color. But there's also the intentionality at every step of the way. And that's one of the lessons learned, if you will, the making sure that we are including equity in all of our decision making. And so when we're sourcing, when we go to a search firm and say, okay, this is a specialized role, we need external support. Very intentional, demanding that that search firm saturate the slate with women of color. We know, we've seen the research that one is not effective. The Rohini rule does not work, okay? But so we know that we must saturate, we demand that of our sourcing and recruiting partners, and that's how we continue that momentum. So a combination of being very intentional, as others have said, measuring, keeping our scorecard going, and then the development all the way down the pipeline. And if I may, Rohini, I was in a board meeting this morning, and a quote, one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King came up, and it just seems so appropriate. And that is when he said that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And it just fits so well when we talk about women, we talk about women of color, we talk about the dimensions, the various dimensions of diversity, but what affects one affects all.
Yeah, very true. I think that was well said. And I think, the intentionality, the leadership, certainly you're seeing the results. 40% women of color, many in P&L roles and senior positions, and paying it forward. That's tremendous. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jose. And I think maybe we move to the action question, Jose. And if there are other comments that the panelists want to make based on the questions we had sent them, you're welcome to roll that into your closing remarks. But I think I'll turn it over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Rohini. Yes, and I would like to wrap up this session on a positive note. With a great crisis, obviously comes with great opportunities. And how do we leverage this moment in time with all the challenges around COVID and racial justice and economic realities? How do we meet these challenges for all our stakeholders? And instead of stalling or going backwards, as some reports have us believe, how do we leapfrog diversity, equity, and inclusion by taking bold action and collaborating where possible? So let me start with Astha at Zendesk.
Yeah, I think again, this is not a new topic, unfortunately, right? So the challenge has been just the slow progress, and I just feel to what Gerri was saying before, like just having, say, even one woman in your leadership team is not enough, but many a times the onus falls on that one person. So I'm really hoping that as we continue to push towards having more diverse and inclusive leadership teams, organizations, and cultures, the onus doesn't just fall on the person who's been hired to fill that gap. And that is the fact that everyone just has to embrace. And you can only do that by having goals around it. I've always believed that organizations can talk about being progressive, doing the right things, but an organization is running a business. So if it's not part of their strategic imperative, if it's not listed as their key OKR or objectives, whatever they're doing in terms of measuring their success, it's never going to be a priority. So to me, the number one thing that all organizations must do is absolutely have that as a strategic objective, for their companies.
Thank you. How about you, Meena? What are your thoughts?
Thank you. So yeah, I would like to stress on the cultural diversity. So to give an example, we have been supporting the Indian Health Services with the tribal populations' public health. So we started helping them preventing sexually transmitted diseases among their various tribal populations, and we started helping them with HIV prevention just a couple of years ago. And we are getting into the COVID-19 prevention. And from that, what we are adapting is also to learn to work with the cultural diversity in front of us, even within the tribal populations, which we all have known that, they've come under in the news that they are being impacted a bit more. Certain populations are impacted a little bit more, and they are also culturally diverse. And when we go into, we're proposing ideas to do contact tracing for those populations, and not everyone is going to respond to the same methodology. So even with some of the tribal populations, they're technologically advanced. So we employ and deploy some of the technically advanced methodologies to educate them the preventive techniques and also to collect data from them so we can help them better. But other populations, they're culturally rich, and they really have certain ways in which they receive the information. So we have secured their cultural ambassador to go along with us on our team. So we are one team now. We go together there and then collect information. So we are in a better position to help them. So the methodologies are the same, but the mechanisms in which we deliver the methodologies have to be different. And we got to be sensitive to the different populations. As we are the business leaders, not everything is the same. And it may not be quite visible, but we got to be making ourselves and our teams engaging with our customers to be a little bit more aware of what would work better. And then we're going to really make a lot of progress in supporting some of these teams, because we all have culturally diverse customers too. So I think that is a very critical criteria that we can keep in mind as we approach the diversity situation.
Thank you, Meena. Balaji, any bold action from you to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think we need to be holistic. See, it is the worst of times, but the worst of times brings out the best of people. And I think it is a moment of adversity, but it's also a moment of opportunity. And if you see the kind of bold action that companies, especially boards and CEOs and executives and people in organizations are taking, they are taking across all of the dimensions of the crisis that I mentioned earlier. I think what is important is to make sure that when we rebuild our enterprises, our countries and our communities, we integrate purpose into it, right? I believe that purpose is the new tech. The last 10 years or more, every company wanted to be a technology company and transform the experience for their consumers and for businesses. But today, every company wants to be a purpose-driven company. And it's easier said than done. So we need to hold their feet to the fire. We need to have a better say-do ratio so that we do more and say less. and let the doing do the same, right? And I want to just highlight a couple of stories as I wrap this up to share why it is important to integrate this from a business, employee, and a community perspective. We have programs that actually are mirror images of the issues that we see in society. For example, the STEM skills gap is huge, and especially in the US, women and minorities are so underrepresented in these disciplines. And our flagship program, Go IT, I'm proud to share that which has impacted over 30,000 students across the country, around 100 100 cities across the country. The metrics in that is we have over nearly 50% women and 67% minorities. So it is possible to design and create partnerships along with school systems and with nonprofit organizations to be the exact mirror image of what is not there. So in that, I want to share the story of Emily Strickland, who is a teacher from South Carolina. She represents the education crisis and the impact of the other crises that we are encountering. She was asked to come back to school and plan for back to school at a time when the COVID crisis was at its zenith and lockdown had happened, and overnight you have to shift to a remote model. And the kind of courage and resilience that she showed, she's part of our Ignite My Future in School program. We provide transdisciplinary computational thinking resources and professional development for teachers. She stayed strong. She met her students where they were at. And she was able to modulate the way in which she was teaching and engaging her students. And that gives me hope that if a teacher in an under-resourced school can do that, we in organizations can do so much more. And the second story I want to highlight is of Asha Rani Mondal, who is a young woman in a very backward district in India. And I had the opportunity to visit that place a few months ago before the COVID crisis hit. She comes from a background where she came from a different state, Orissa, and moved to this place called West Bengal. So she doesn't speak the language. She was married into this patriarchal system, and she didn't know what to do. She was educated, but she had ambition, but she didn't know what to do. And she's part of a Bridge IT program where we develop rural entrepreneurs among places across India. And she became part of this program, immersed herself in it, and the spark and the kind of leadership she showed, she was able to not only overcome language barrier, the social barrier, and the financial barrier. She went on to set up her own business, employ other people. And why I mentioned her story is during this COVID crisis, when her village needed resources and the government announced all these schemes for the things to reach the people, the stimulus and the other supports to reach the people, she was the last mile connector, using digital and digital services to provide those services for her community. And it is leaders like Emily, leaders like Asha Rani that give us hope that if they can do it, we have a responsibility to do so much more.
Thank you. Thank you. Quickly, because we've run out of time. First, Gerri, and then Kerri, can you finish up with your bold action?
In the interest of time, I think it's really just the 9 points that WBC, adopting those, being very intentional, specific, dogged about what you want to accomplish. But in parallel to that, much like Balaji described, that whole notion of purpose, and I love it, purpose is the new tech, thank you. But I think that adds to that sense of belonging. Kerri.
Yeah, and very quickly to pile on, this is not a time for incrementalism. It's a time for bold declarations and decisive actions. And I think there are a couple of different categories, I guess 4. One in the programs and practices with our own employees, second with our customers, third with our community, and fourth with our suppliers.
Great, thank you so much.
So I just want to join Jose in thanking all of you. That was an incredible panel, fantastic takeaways, purpose is a new tech, bold declarations. I love that, mindful of customers and providing solutions to the needs of diverse customers, being intentional. I think you all hit all of these high notes. And I just want to close with a quote from someone who's very special to me, Dr. Haidt. You can actually see her picture behind my chair on the wall. She was a civil rights icon, known for her beautiful hats. And she said at one of the events that we had, she said that leaders are dreamers with shovels in their hands. Leaders are dreamers with shovels in their hands. And to me, I think each one of the panelists today, Kerri, Astha, Meena, Balaji, Gerri, they all really embody that, because they have a vision for what can be, a vision for their legacy, and they're doing those immediate, bold declarations, time for declarations and actions today in order to achieve that vision. So thank you all, and it's been a pleasure partnering with you, Jose. Thank you.
Thank you.